Have you ever stopped to think if what's happening with Trump is much more serious than it seems? If the headlines you read every day are just a smokescreen for something much bigger, something that goes beyond courts, accusations, and campaigns? Well, yes. I also thought I understood what was at stake. Until now, and what I discovered made me realize how wrong we all were about the true depth of this crisis. For months, the narrative was clear. Trump faces legal problems, may lose political support, may not. But what almost no one realizes is that his case isn't just about him, it's about entire system collapsing. A power game that is fragmenting before our eyes. And when this structure begins to crumble, it's not just politicians who fall. It's alliances, fortunes, and even pillars of the global economy that tremble together. Behind the scenes in the courts, banks are distancing themselves, business leaders are recalculating risks, and allies are quietly switching sides. And it is this silence that screams louder than any headline. What seemed like a political drama now looks like a thermometer of something much deeper, a change that affects not only the United States, but the entire global balance of power. So, before saying that all this is just another American scandal, stop and observe the signs, the tensions between powers, the fear in the markets, the distrust in institutions. Everything is connected, and that's precisely what I want to show you today, how each move in this crisis reveals what's really happening behind the scenes, and why this story is about to become the turning point no one expected. For a long time, what you heard around here was simple. Trump is facing yet another lawsuit. It's just an election strategy. He always gets away with these. This was the narrative repeated in every headline, every talk show, and every heated debate on social media. It seemed that everything boiled down to just another fight between Republicans and Democrats, a fleeting power struggle. But what almost no one realized is that this superficial interpretation was exactly what the powerful forces wanted the public to believe. It was convenient to reduce a political earthquake to a simple legal process. After all, if everything is just another controversy, no one pays attention to the tectonic plates shifting beneath the system. The public looked at the headlines, at the fiery speeches, and thought, Trump is being persecuted. Or perhaps just paying for his own mistakes. But the real plot isn't in the headlines, it unfolds quietly in the boardrooms of large corporations, in the connections between lobbyists and banks, behind the scenes where real power never shows itself openly. What seemed like a courtroom battle is, in fact, a fight for the survival of an entire power model that has begun to crumble. And this realization changes everything, because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. What is at stake is not just the political future of one man, but the credibility of the system that created him. While most believed the problem was legal, something began to happen away from the spotlight. Major donors, who for years had supported campaigns and alliances, began to withdraw. Executives who had previously cheered the anti-establishment rhetoric began to feel the weight of the instability. And the market, the same one that seemed indifferent to political scandals, began to show signs of fear. When money changes direction, power changes along with it. That's what few realized. The Trump case is, in essence, a reflection of the internal collapse of trust among American political and financial elites. Some people think all this is just a coincidence, that it's merely the natural cycles of politics. But it's not. There's something deeper, something structural. We are witnessing the exhaustion of an era in which influence and capital defined the limits of truth. And suddenly, the figure that symbolized this disruptive power began to become the very symbol of decadence. This is what happens when the system that elevated you begins to crumble. It takes its icons, its promises, and its certainties with it. Now imagine the impact of this within the American establishment itself. Institutions that have always prided themselves on stability have begun to act as if they were treading on broken glass. Every move is calculated, every decision is weighed for fear of triggering a chain reaction. What was believed to be just a trial has turned into a silent struggle for institutional survival. Banks, technology companies, and media groups all have begun to reposition their pieces, as if they already know the board is about to turn. And it is at this point that everything begins to make sense. The accusations, the trials, the electoral strategies are just the tip of the iceberg. What is really at stake is the transition of power within the United States. Then this transition does not happen without friction. Trump, whether you like him or not, was the catalyst that exposed the fragility of the alliances between politics and capital. He was the face of a system that claimed to challenge the establishment, but depended on the same structures to stay alive. When this network of dependency begins to fail, the crisis ceases to be personal and becomes structural. The signs were there: canceled meetings, suspended support, speeches that sounded too vague for someone who previously spoke with conviction. The climate of uncertainty that now hangs over Washington didn't arise by chance. It stems from years of accumulated wear and tear, unfulfilled promises, and a country divided between ideal and reality. And Trump, with all his political and symbolic weight, has become the focal point of this collective exhaustion. That's why saying it's just a trial is to underestimate the magnitude of what is happening. Think about it. When an empire begins to doubt itself, it doesn't need external enemies to weaken. The collapse comes from within, from the invisible cracks that no one wants to admit, and those cracks are exposed today. It's not just about a former president trying to defend himself, but about corporations trying to preserve influence, parties trying to redefine their identity, and citizens trying to understand where they can still trust. It's a silent earthquake, one that few can hear until they feel the ground move. Meanwhile, outside the courts, the numbers speak for themselves. The flow of political capital is shifting. Business people who once bet on polarization are now seeking stability. Foreign investors are watching cautiously, and, curiously, the United States' historical allies, Canada, Europe, even strategic partners in Asia are beginning to draw up alternative plans, as if the world's beacon were wavering. This is no coincidence. It's the reflection of a nation that has always seen itself as the center, but now faces the discomfort of realizing that the world keeps turning even when it falters. And here's where it all connects. The mistake was underestimating the seriousness of Trump's situation, but failing to realize that your personal crisis is a reflection of a systemic crisis. When financial, political, and institutional power all fall apart simultaneously, the result is unpredictable. What we are seeing is a slow-motion collapse not just of a career, but of a model of hegemony. And the most frightening thing is that many still treat this as if it were just another chapter in a political soap opera. It's not. It's the script for the transformation of an empire in real time. And it is precisely here that things start to get even more serious. Because if this collapse of the power base is real, if the withdrawal of business people, banks, and donors continues, what comes next could irreversibly change the political balance of the United States. As time passes, what seemed like just a momentary turbulence begins to transform into something deeper and quieter, an invisible network of pressure, moving beneath the surface, reconfiguring loyalties, agreements, and even fears. No one speaks openly about it, but everyone feels it. It's that feeling that something is moving behind the scenes, that the gears of power are grinding, and that those who once seemed untouchable now measure every word before acting. And if you observe closely, you will notice the signs of this shift. Behind the scenes in Washington, the financial and political elite operate with the same survival instinct that drives the great predators of the jungle. When they smell blood or instability, they retreat silently, cut ties, and change course. That is exactly what is happening now. While the media debates accusations, trials, and speeches, something far more important is happening off camera. Major banks are terminating contracts, campaign funds are being redirected, and allies who once defended Trump tooth and nail now prefer strategic silence. This silence is revealing. It shows that the real judgment isn't happening in the courtrooms, but in the rooms where billion-dollar decisions are made. There, away from the flashing lights, the only question circulating is it worth continuing to be associated with him? And when that doubt takes hold, it corrodes everything: reputations, partnerships, influence. Trump has always been seen as a powerful political asset, a disruptive force. But when the market begins to see disruption as a risk, the relationship changes. The one who once seemed indestructible becomes a symbol of instability. And it is at this point that the web of power begins to unravel. Corporations that once lined up to secure access and influence now act as if they were never around. Career politicians adjust their rhetoric, trying to distance themselves without appearing treacherous. It's a carefully choreographed game of dissimulation, and while the public debates morality, justice, or politics, the system simply reconfigures itself coldly, calculatedly, invisibly. From the outside, it seems like a simple change in political winds. But in reality, it's a domino effect in real time. When one link in the chain breaks, others follow. Capital abandons ship first. The media adjusts the narrative soon after. And institutions which previously seemed solid begin to search for a new anchor to maintain apparent stability. All of this creates a sense of normality, but behind it lies pure fear, the fear of the collapse of trust. And it is precisely this loss of trust that marks the beginning of the turnaround. Because when elites stop believing in each other, power fragments. What was once an empire of alliances becomes a minefield of conflicting interests. At that moment, every decision ceases to be about justice and becomes about survival. And that is when Trump's story ceases to be just a political biography and becomes a mirror of crisis of an entire system. The numbers illustrate this in an almost cruel way. Business owners who once championed its agenda now prefer discreet meetings with their opponents. Investment funds which, in practice, shape global policies are reducing their exposure to American political risk. And even former foreign allies are signaling unease, questioning whether it's still worthwhile to bet everything on a power that seems to be fighting against itself. What's most curious is how all this happens almost silently, as if an invisible force were coordinating every movement. There's no central order, no declared plan, it's pure instinct for self-preservation. The financial establishment adapts to the speed of the threat, and when it realizes that instability could corrode the system itself, it reacts. It's like watching a living organism trying to heal itself from the inside out, isolating the part it considers sick. And, in this case, that part is precisely the political core that once promised to drain the swamp, but ended up exposing its depth. And perhaps that's the most symbolic point of this story. The figure who promised to confront the system has become the perfect reflection of its own decadence. The outsider who claimed to challenge the elites is now seen by them as an existential threat. This is what makes the scenario so unpredictable. It's not just a man being pressured. It's the system trying to eliminate an anomaly it created itself. It's the body reacting to the virus, without realizing that the defense process can destroy the organism itself. Now the question is, what happens when this power network begins to completely disintegrate? When those who control the flow of capital, media, and influence can no longer control the narrative? The answer lies in the streets, on social media, and, above all, in public opinion. What was once control now transforms into noise. And when noise dominates, trust disappears. This loss of confidence is beginning to manifest itself visibly. The public that once fervently defended every speech, every attack, and every show of force is beginning to show signs of weariness. The words no longer resonate as they once did. The same phrase that once inflamed crowds now provokes indifference. It's as if political fatigue has finally won over the spectacle, and that's the turning point. When the symbol loses its luster, the myth begins to crumble. Trump's image, which for years was associated with strength, resilience, and defiance of the system, is beginning to suffer the same wear and tear that befalls any leader when the narrative is repeated without results. People still recognize it, but they no longer feel the same emotional impact. There's something different in the air, a mixture of disappointment and doubt. It's the price of saturation, when the audience realizes they are watching the same act from a theater that no longer moves them. And this erosion of image is as dangerous as any legal process. Because, in a world where politics is driven by perception, losing control of one's own narrative is the first step towards real collapse. And that is exactly what is beginning to happen now. The erosion of his image is slow, almost imperceptible at first. It doesn't happen with an explosion, but with the subtle sound of something crumbling in the background, like an old structure cracking from within. For a while, there are still applause, still defenders, still echoes, but this echo begins to sound hollow, distant, as if the energy that once sustained Trump's image is silently dissipating. It's the moment when charisma begins to lose strength in the face of collective fatigue. People don't openly say they're tired, they just begin to fall silent, and silence, in politics, speaks louder than any speech. The signs are everywhere. The crowds are no longer the same. The fiery speeches that once mobilized entire masses now face less attentive cameras and shorter applause. On social media, comments that were once cries of loyalty are now divided between defense and doubt. The algorithm senses this before the public. Engagement drops, enthusiasm evaporates, content loses its power. And this is the beginning of what strategists call a saturation crisis. No myth survives intact when the public realizes that the narrative doesn't change. For years, Trump was the symbol of a man who stood up to the system. But now he faces the dilemma of every leader who challenges power, when the force that lifts you up is the same force that begins to destroy you. The outsider's narrative worked as long as there was a clear enemy, but without victories, the hero seems weary, and the audience, driven by emotion, begins to seek another spectacle. This collapse is not just personal, it's symbolic. It reflects the weariness of a generation that believed in change, but watched the elites grow even richer, while the people remain trapped in the same cost of living. When the promise doesn't become reality, the myth crumbles. Trump was the man who exposed the system, and ended up being swallowed by it. The rhetoric of resistance already sounds predictable. The same phrases, the same struggle, the same cycle. And when everything sounds the same, the spell is broken. Even the most loyal begin to doubt. The movement divides, its strength disperses. And it is at this moment that the political impact becomes a global impact. When the US leader loses strength, the whole world feels it. Moscow, Beijing, Brussels, everyone observes the power vacuum. Every American hesitation is an opportunity for other powers to advance. China moves in silence. Russia waits for the division to deepen. Europe rethinks its dependence. What was stability has turned into uncertainty. And when the world doubts American strength, the dollar trembles, the market hesitates, and new powers gain ground. Trump is merely a symptom, a reflection of the collapse of an empire he believed to be eternal. The economy still functions, but trust is gone. Without trust, no empire survives. What we are witnessing is not just a trial. It is a historic turning point. The fall of a myth and the birth of a new world order. If you feel the system has gone too far, comment, change on OW, click here below, and then click on the video that appears on the screen to understand how this crisis is paving the way for a new global power axis. This is not the end, it's the turning point.